Camouflage pattern. Its purpose is meant to hide a soldier's location on the battlefield. Off the battlefield, it's a way to distinguish the soldier of one nationality from another, besides the flag on their shoulder, of course. Today's video will be a somewhat lighter topic, comparing and contrasting the camouflage patterns of the three Baltic land forces. We'll try to dig up a little history and background on the development of each pattern at the same time. So, let's get started. Let's start off with Lithuania, whose current pattern was phased in around 2020 or so. It was actually at the beginning of 2018 that it was announced that the Lithuanian army would be changing its soldiers' combat or field uniform. The pattern of the fabric would be printed in a universal camouflage pattern meant to adapt to as many as 4 different environments. The plan was for the uniforms to be gradually replaced over 3 years and was said to be cheaper to produce than the ones they were replacing, the ones you see here. An article by LRT says that it was Lithuania's Special Operations Forces that raised the idea of changing the pattern of uniforms to a universal one because that was also being done by allies like the United States and the United Kingdom. More recently, Canada has also taken on a multicam. A military media statement says that sometime in the late 2000s, a working group was established by order of the command of the Lithuanian Armed Forces. The task was to prepare a concept of the 21st century soldiers' clothing and equipment system, and one of the directives was to switch to a single pattern and coloring field uniform. The first of these uniforms was tested by the Lithuanian Special Operations Forces carrying out combat missions with them in Afghanistan. After the first field tests, there were a few corrections and adjustments, but after this it was decided that the uniforms with this pattern would be introduced throughout the entirety of Lithuania's land forces. A description of the design of the fabric pattern with a universal camouflage pattern was prepared back in 2013, and in 2014 the design was registered at the State Patent Office. The design of the uniforms is the property of the Lithuanian military and can only be worn by members of the Lithuanian Armed Forces. Spokesperson for Lithuania's Defense Resources Agency of the Ministry of Defense, Captain Marijus Matukas, stated, "The Allied troops actually appreciated it. They asked who created it, who initiated it, etc. Various interesting questions arose. They compared their uniforms, their pattern, with those of the Lithuanian army, and the feedback was really excellent. The results showed that. So there was no doubt that eventually we would switch to a universal pattern." The incoming uniform replaced this green forest pattern and was intended for up to 4 types of environment: forest, city, hilly area, and deserts. The cut and design of the new uniform remained identical to the previous field uniform, with only the fabric being different, a material that was said to be significantly more resistant to wear. The acting commander of the logistics board of the Lithuanian Armed Forces at the time stated, "The decision to revise the color scheme of the uniform was determined by several factors. Soldiers noted that the green print uniforms now used on missions stand out in a non-wooded area such as a city. The uniforms of the new sample were tested by the soldiers of the Special Operations Forces, and after their evaluation, a decision was made to gradually update the uniforms." LRT says that the designer of the Lithuanian uniform design was a Special Forces soldier, and that the Vytis cross sign is hidden in the pattern itself. We can just see its contours, which cannot be seen with the naked eye. When it comes to cost, the Lithuanian army says only slightly more than €3,000 was spent on creating this new uniform design. Even better, it was reported that the new field uniform would be about 1/10 cheaper than the forest print uniform it replaced. Funds would also be saved by eliminating the need to have 2 uniform patterns, a green print and an international operations pattern. Now, we've heard from some Lithuanian soldiers that not everyone is a fan of the newer pattern. Mostly that it is simply too bright for the forested areas of Lithuania. We can imagine it would do better in an urban environment, and of course in the desert, but looking at some footage of soldiers in action, it does indeed seem like the uniform is less effective in the woods. With this pattern developed at a time when Lithuania was deploying troops to the Middle East, it did make a lot of sense, and it might still be useful for Lithuania's international deployments far away, such as the NATO mission Iraq. But as you'll see with the next country, a change was made to cater more to the local environment. Next up is Latvia. In 2020, it was announced that a team of 5 National Guard scientists worked on the creation of the new camouflage pattern by the name of Wood Lat Pat for the National Armed Forces uniform. The name probably is a shortened mashup of wood, Latvia, and pattern. According to the official press release, it was said that their task was to find the most characteristic natural landscape of Latvia and develop the new camouflage pattern for the uniform accordingly. The change from this pattern took place because it had been a while since the so-called desert or Latpat pixel pattern was developed, and over this period of time, both the geopolitical situation and technical capabilities have radically changed. At the time Latpat was created, it considered the fact that Latvian troops were participating in international missions in Iraq and Afghanistan as part of the coalition forces, where this desert pattern is very suitable. It was added that the pixel size of the old pattern used to work well for hiding from satellite observation. However, at close distances, the rapidly improving resolution of observation devices means that the squares are simply too large now. National Guard Captain Juris Kiploks, head of the National Guard Science, Research and Innovation Implementation Center, spoke about the new pattern, saying, "This newly developed camouflage pattern is closer to fractal graphics. These are computer-generated abstract objects using the same mathematical equation repeatedly, but changing the values of the equation each time. The basis of the pattern is made of irregular triangles with a side length of 3 to 5 centimeters. We investigated that this is the average size, which corresponds to objects found in nature, for example, the length of tree leaves. To simplify, the new camouflage pattern is an artificially created pattern based on Latvian nature motifs." Since the Latvian armed forces are currently focusing more on protecting their territory, and the sensitivity of various technical means and the possibilities of their use in detecting camouflaged objects have also increased significantly, the Latvian military says that it was clear that a new camouflage pattern was needed that is specifically suited to the geographical conditions of Latvia. The new pattern is meant for snowless weather and begins to quote-unquote work at a distance of 20 meters. Similarly, natural vegetation in Latvia has also changed over the years. For example, trees such as maple have become widespread. Captain Kiploks says, "If it was once an exclusive park tree, now it is often found in uncontrolled stands in forests and around cities." Kiploks continues, saying, "In fact, the previous multi-Latpat article was developed for a 3,000-kilometer radius of operation and not specifically for Latvia. It practically covers an area with very different vegetation and climatic conditions. Also, a very limited circle of experts from the National Armed Forces was previously involved in making the final decision, and we also had no information that any optoelectronic devices or recognition algorithms would be used when testing the camouflage properties in various conditions." Kiploks emphasizes that optoelectronic surveillance capabilities have improved significantly in recent years. Nowadays, even phones have cameras with much better resolution than the best digital cameras had 10 years ago. Therefore, artificial intelligence is also very good at recognizing the smallest pixel on the uniforms of the Latvian armed forces, even at a great distance. On the topic of cost, we couldn't find a precise figure like with Lithuania. However, the new pattern was said to be developed on a fairly low budget. In fact, the National Guardsmen of the National Guard Science, Research and Innovation Implementation Center weren't paid anything more than their usual salaries for the time dedicated to the project and for development of the new camouflage. It was stated that no other bonuses or royalties were paid for it. It was estimated that the development costs are probably much lower than they would have been if scientists from civilian structures were involved. And finally, on this note, Kiploks says, "The ownership of the camouflage pattern belongs entirely to the National Armed Forces, and there are no additional costs, such as patent fees, related to its use, and there will be none in the future. During the execution of this work, we have accumulated sufficient experience to be able to develop and objectively evaluate other methods of masking objects." Now, for Estonia, it was rather difficult for us to find official sources. However, Estonian public media published an article about new uniforms in 2008. Of course, it's now 2025, and so the design isn't so new anymore. But back in 2008, the Ministry of Defense stated that it would officially introduce a newer uniform with a so-called digital camouflage pattern in the defense forces. This is a 4-color camouflage pattern, and the new uniforms would be made of a new fabric and have a new cut. Compared to the previous 3-color camouflage pattern, it was stated that the 4-color pattern blends better into the Estonian landscape. The uniform and its pattern were developed by the Logistics Department of the Defense Forces General Staff and were tested in both Estonian military units and on foreign missions. It's said that this Estonian pattern, EstDCU, may look like and may have been influenced by Canada's digital CADPAT pattern, but was developed independently. A last note about Estonia's combat uniforms is that the country's land forces retains two environmental patterns. The original, green, is obviously for woodlands, but Estonian forces deployed to places like Iraq have a desert version to wear. This pattern appears to have a tan base with patches of a pale greyish-green and fewer patches of dark brown. And so it's clear that each country had various things to consider. Latvia considered technological innovation of both uniform design/production as well as detection by enemies, while Estonia appeared to have followed Canada's lead with a digital pattern. Lithuania, considering its missions abroad, tried to make a more universal pattern, something that seems to stand out a little more in Lithuanian forests. Estonia clearly did not jump on the multicam trend and has stuck with its now nearly 20-year-old design. Latvia tried to do the multicam thing, but, well, has decided to change things yet again. On the topic of single environment patterns versus multi-environment patterns, Latvia's Captain Kiploks was quoted as saying, "We must repeat the already heard saying, what is good for everything is good for nothing. Currently, it's not possible to create such camouflage with the materials available to us that would be equally suitable for all life situations and climatic conditions, both in winter and summer, in the forest and in the city. Therefore, we focused on the absolute largest part of the country's territory and weather conditions." But of course, we'd love to hear what you think about these patterns and their effectiveness. Is Estonia overdue for a change and modernization, or is there no point, since it works so well? And do you think Lithuania needs to redevelop something that works better in its forests, or will this pattern be good enough? After all, it might actually be quite good in urban environments. Anything you have to say on these topics, please do leave it as a comment down below. As always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.